Welcome, everyone. I'm so glad you're with us today. We're going to be continuing through the book of Philippians. Want to make you aware of and remind you about our question and response episode coming up. I was talking with the brother I'm going to be sitting down with just a couple days ago as I'm recording this, maybe it was yesterday now, and we had a great conversation. Really looking forward to that. And so I was looking back, trying to remember what deadline we'd set, and I don't know if I set a deadline or not. So whatever we've said before, this is the final will and testament. April 1st, 2024. April 1st, 2024 will be the deadline for our question and response episode. So you can send us a message on Facebook, Instagram. We've got the podcast email. You can also hit us up on the YouTube comments. I'll be checking back through those, scanning through those. So if you got a question this episode while you're watching, if you're watching on YouTube, just drop that question in, and we'll circle back and make sure we try to get that answered for you. Today, we're going to be looking at Philippians chapter 4, verses 8 and 9. Philippians chapter 4, verses 8 and 9. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there's any excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. As for the things you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things, and the God of peace will be with you. This week, as we continue through the so-called Christian meditations of Philippians chapter 4, we see and we learn about the prize and the pursuit of the peace of God, the prize and the pursuit of the peace of God. When we allow ourselves to be shaped and molded by the process that we've examined the last few weeks, over time, we can exchange a heart of anxiety for a heart of peace. We read a few weeks ago that we must rejoice in God, we must pursue gentle responses, we must be constant in hope, not feed our anxiety, and plead to God with thanksgiving. The last couple weeks, we've seen the serene mind that God both promises us and calls us to pursue. Essentially, it's the whole entire passage. So far, we've established that we need to discern and cling to truth. We should have thoughts that would cause us to be honored if no one knew, or if anyone knew, rather. If anyone knew, they would be honored. Similarly, we need to make sure we fervently pursue thoughts that ensure justice and fairness instead of overzealous fault-finding or wishful idealization. Last week, we learned that we need to have purity of motives, as well as refuse to ponder sin with affection. We should cling to thoughts that are lovely and pleasant. And finally, we should rejoice in good news and in thoughts that have been deemed commendable. This week, we'll finish out the list and take a close look at the final verse, which is a further promise of hope with the God of peace being with us. Our big idea is pursue excellence in your mind. Pursue excellence in your mind. Understand that. We want to look at number 1, ruminate on the praiseworthy. Number 2, identify successful examples. And number 3, peace is practiced. So ruminate on the praiseworthy, identify successful examples, and peace is practiced. So ruminate, identify, and practice are going to be the words that we think about today. Now, you may have noticed that there are 2 items on the list, both excellence and praiseworthiness. And we only get 1 supporting idea for each. We kind of take 2 supporting ideas from verse number 9. And that's a fair observation, and you might object that we're not giving the list a full treatment. And I can appreciate that. It's exactly the reaction I would have and roll my eyes with. But, just hang with me here for a second. We want to make sure we get to the ideas of verse number 9, and as I hope you'll see, the 2 ideas of seeking excellence and seeking praiseworthiness are coupled together as a catch-all for the rest of the list. Let me justify that to you. Notice the phrasing here is whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable. And that's repetitive. You got the whatever is blank, whatever is blank. However, when we get to the end here of this list, it's not the whatever it is formula, it's the if there is any excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise. So the formula changes here. And that can kind of tell us that there's a little bit of a distinguishment between these 2 things and the other items on the list, that they're separated from it in an important way. And also, these 2 are probably the most alike items on the list. And they have a significant crossover with the other things, but they are very similar. Really, I would suggest these are added, and they become a catch-all that allows us to see and to get any ideas that may fall between the cracks. You know, as if true and honorable and lovely and right and pure. If all those things aren't enough, add these 2 here. We need to see things that are excellent, extraordinary, and superior. These are things that aren't just mediocre, but they're a cut above. With the word praiseworthy, it's the things that are worthy of praise. They're esteemable. They're laudable. These aren't just things that you can get by with, but that which is good and needs to be reinforced. As Christians, we can't think about what everybody else is thinking about. Saying, well, everybody else is talking about this. Everybody else is going through and processing this. Well, that's not sufficient. Christians must seek to be higher and better. We need to seek to ponder things that can be praised and things that are truly good. In this case, society is not the standard of allowable thought, but we seek to strive to have a mind that pleases God, that has the mind of Christ himself. What are the things that God finds true and honorable and right and lovely and pure and commendable and excellent and praiseworthy? Our culture may have things that are out of line with God's perspective, but we need to seek the standard of God and let him define what are those things and then seek to pursue them to have his peace. Coming out of the Christian meditations and into the final verse here that we've looked at for the last several weeks, Paul says the things you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice those things. First, Paul is completely exhausting all the ways and the manner of life that they can see. Every opportunity that he can show them the sort of person they need to be, he is taking that avenue. And he is consistent in his presentation. He's consistent in his presentation of the peace that can be found by knowing the God of peace. He's not trying to, say and teach one thing and then live another. He has it figured out. He's showing it and he's demonstrating it. He has something that people had ample and extensive time to hear and see in him. It shows the first two things that are important as we think about this point here. First is that Christian leaders need to serve as examples. They need to serve as examples. And second, we need to choose to follow those who have demonstrated knowledge. As for Christian leaders, their example and their conduct is critical to their ability to minister to other Christians. A Christian leader is only as effective as they are in their ability to lead people to Jesus. For better or worse, people often learn best from pattern of life and following other people. A lot of habits, positive or negative, come from the examples in our family. They are caught and not taught, as we might say. As much as you can tell people to control their anger, they're going to learn best when they see how you choose to calm yourself down in the midst of a stressful situation. Further, as we look to people to imitate, flipping it around, as we think about Christian leaders, we need to behave in this way. But similarly, seeking examples, we need to find people who have knowledge and experience. There are some people who have really wonderful ideas that make a lot of sense, but they can't generate tangible results. And that says that, hey, maybe it's new, but maybe it's not actually practical or workable. If they can't generate tangible results, it might show that the thing they're teaching isn't all that it looks to be. If you're trying to raise kids, find someone who's raised kids with success. If you're struggling with your job, find someone with career experience. If you want to handle anxiety, depression, or other mental struggles, find someone who has a balanced life of joy, not just someone who has a lot to say on the topic. This was a particularly common thing in the early aughts and the teens, where technology revolutions were really getting exciting, and there was a lot of platforming of younger Christian leaders and thought leaders, and it did tremendous damage to the church. It did tremendous damage. We need to be thoughtful about the people that we choose to follow as examples. Last, we want to notice that these things were learned and heard, they were received and they were seen, and they should be practiced. This practice will lead to peace. This practice will lead to peace. This goes back to a theme that we've seen throughout the first 4 episodes. Paul isn't giving us a pill, he's giving us a practice. Let's say that again. Paul isn't giving us a pill, he's giving us a practice. Practices are something we commit ourselves to, and they, over time, shape the way we think. They change us. We change our lives around these practices, and those practices, in turn, change who we are. These are habits that we dedicate ourselves to, and we prioritize them. We might lapse occasionally, but over weeks, months, and years, those lapses become the exception, not the rule. In particular, Paul is saying that these passages, they need to be, or the things in this passage, rather, it needs to be practiced, going all the way back to the joy, gentleness, hope, and thankful pleading. These people certainly need it because they've got serious problems. The practices that he's given are needed and they are effective. Remember, chapter 1, he's talking about the concern of coming persecution. In chapter 3, he's talking about pursuing holiness and self-denial. In chapter 4, he's mentioned the reality of disagreement with influential gospel workers, potential thought leaders in the Christian community. And that may be a foreshadowing of the mind they need to have in chapter 2. In many ways, this practice is given to people who need the help. This is not a practice that is given to a bunch of people who are living their best lives, who are doing well, who are thriving. This isn't a practice that's given to people who have it all figured out. This is a problem, or rather a practice given to people with real problems. And we should trust that. We should trust that just like it worked for them in their day and age, it will work for us as well, this ancient wisdom. Here's the thing about practices, though. They are transformative, but it does take time. Just like the practice of sin and carnality is transformative, practicing these Christian meditations and focusing on them will transform you. Sometimes it's going to be difficult. Sometimes your mind's going to wander. Sometimes you will forget. Sometimes you will feel like it was a waste of time. But every time we do it, a practice is about investing in the kind of person God is calling us to be. It's an embodiment and a choice to be the person God says we need to be and that we'll be blessed by being. So that brings us to the end of this 3-part series on the Christian meditations and kind of the 5-part look at the mental practices that God has given us to have peace. Christians should have thoughts which are excellent. They shouldn't just settle for what is acceptable or tolerable or what they can get away with and people won't bother them, but they need to be thinking on things that are praiseworthy as a summary of all the good and just and lovely and pure and right things that are there. Further, we should see the value of Christian examples in doing this and the need to commit ourselves to these as a practice. We need to make sure that if we're struggling to live these things out, to think on these things, find people who are successful Christians and follow them in doing it. And as Christian leaders, we need to present these things as well. That we can't live a life where we're totally off the rails and call people to the peace of God. So we can't call them to something we don't know. As we wrap up, I want to note the outcome. The guaranteed outcome from the pursuit of both of these lists in chapters, or in verses 4 through 6, and then, or 4 through 7, and then 8 and 9 as well. We have the peace of God, and we have the God of peace with us. We live in a world that is crazy and chaotic. And perhaps some of you have overcome challenges in the last week or month or decade. You've overcome some, but there's others that you've been completely overcome by. And maybe for some of you, you haven't known true peace in longer than you can remember. And I want to invite you to that. I want to invite you to know true peace by knowing the peace of God and knowing the God of peace. Christ's desire and God's desire for you is to have his mind and to have fellowship with him, surrounded by him in perfect peace. Let's ask some questions to help you do that. Do you seek excellent thoughts? Do you fix your mind on things that are praiseworthy? Or do you try to get by with what people will leave you alone to do? Worse yet, do you focus on things that are detrimental to your Christian growth and hope no one notices? Do you find yourself looking at things that are sinful and carnal and rejoicing in them and feeding those parts of your mind and those lusts and those passions rather than starving them off and focusing on the positive things of God? Do you find good examples of peace? Who are the 5 people you're listening to the most? Include social media in that. And ask yourself, what has the most effect on you? Do you find yourself modeling the behavior of successful Christians? Do you look up to them and strive to live the way they live, or do they just seem out of focus and out of touch? Are you committed to these last 5 weeks of study as a practice? Are you committed to that? Do you take time to focus on these things, to go through it even when it's difficult? Do you respond by fixing your mind on them when anxiety comes, or do you further stir up anxiety? What would it look like for you to take some time each morning out of your routine, wake up a little bit earlier, in order to fix your mind on these things, to know the peace of God, and to know the God of peace? Thank you so much for joining us today on 15 Minutes and a Big Idea. Today's big idea: pursue excellence in your mind.